over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Wars abroad, the affordability crisis, inflation, censorship of political speech. Is Donald Trump doubling down on all of Joe Biden's failures? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze these events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, in the 2024 presidential campaign, then former President Trump successfully exploited discontent with Joe Biden's administration on all the aforementioned issues and more. Is Trump now making all of these matters worse? My guest is a Jacobin staff writer and the author of Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden, Branko Marcetic. Branko, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back with you.
I was trying to find my copy of the book so I could hold it up, but I couldn't put my hands on it, but I wanted folks to know I have it. I've read it. I've interviewed you on it a couple of times. Phenomenal book, and it's still incredibly relevant. And let me also tell folks, most of what I use in this intro came from your piece. So let me first start with a very simple question, and that is, what motivated you to write this piece at this time?
I mean, usually when you see the government change hands, especially in US politics of the last few decades, the person coming in tends to kind of completely do away with everything the last person did and kind of strike their own, path forward. Particularly Trump, who has kind of seemed to go out of his way, both in 2016 and to some extent now, to kind of roll back the accomplishments of Obama and then now Biden as well. But what was interesting to me was, I watched for 4 years under Biden as people registered numerous complaints and, well-founded complaints too, legitimate ones, about a whole host of issues. Some of which Trump made a direct issue during the campaign of. He said, this is terrible what they've done, I'm going to reverse it. And then all of that has basically continued apace under this new administration. In fact, not just continued, but in many cases, Trump is actually making them much, much worse. And I, having observed this, I could not help it but do my job as a journalist to write about it and bring it to people's attention.
One of the points that a number of people have made over the last couple administrations, particularly, is that it's not so much a matter of party, that it's a matter of degree. And could you make the point? Could someone, after reading your piece, draw the conclusion that Biden and Trump, they were really arguing, they weren't arguing about substance as much as the fight is over process?
Yeah, they can and they should, I think. There is a fundamental continuity between Trump and Biden, in the same way that there was a continuity between Trump and between Biden and the first Trump term, and in the same way that there was continuity from that with Obama, and then Obama with Bush as well. There are differences. I'm not saying that there aren't differences between these administrations, and I think there were very important differences between the Biden administration and what we're seeing in the Trump now. But I think that sometimes these differences get so magnified and blown up that we forget about actually how many similarities there are. And I highlighted a few of them in that piece. I mean,
we'll get to that.
But yeah, I think if you look at the broad scope of the last, let's say, 20 years, you'll find that actually a lot of the presidencies, even though we are endlessly told in the media that these candidates can be more different from each other, that they completely represent diametrically opposed worldviews, all this stuff, they end up actually from a zooming out, taking a more bird's eye view of it, they actually resemble kind of one single administration almost over the years.
You mentioned worldview. One of the questions that I have been trying to answer for myself is, what in the world is Donald Trump's Weltanschauung? What is his worldview? And things seem to be so scattered and inconsistent. We go back to Steve Bannon talking about flooding the zone, talking about the muzzle shot. But even so, we can see all of that. But still, I'm trying to figure out, what in the world is Donald Trump's worldview? And I know you are a whole lot smarter than me. You know the answer to that question.
That's very kind. I actually don't know if I know the answer to that question. I'm trying to figure it out too. I'm actually writing a piece right now about Trump's tariff policy, because I don't think the idea of tariffs is a this kind of forbidden thing that you can't ever have tariffs. I think tariffs have an important role to play, but the way that they have been rolled out under this administration, it's not only self-defeating on its own terms, in terms of if you want to get U.S. manufacturing reshored, you want to build up a U.S. manufacturing base. But even on Trump's other geopolitical goals, isolating China on the world stage, it's done the exact opposite. Maintaining the supremacy of the U.S. dollar and its reserve status, reserve currency status. This has been a huge blow to that as well, even though Trump said that he'll be willing to tariff countries 100% if they dared to try and come up with another global currency. And then you've got the way that the domestic policy of the Trump administration is working against this trade policy. So, at the same time that Trump wants to reshore manufacturing, at the same time he wants to spur investment within the United States for firms to build factories here, to bring jobs here and get people employed. At the same time, he is getting rid of all these provisions that the Biden administration had put in place to facilitate, basically to get the U.S. government to spur private investment in manufacturing in the U.S., because Trump on the domestic level is wedded to this anti-government, quasi-libertarian philosophy of kind of dismantling the 21st century administrative state. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of different things firing at the same time and in different directions and sometimes on each other. And so I'm left with the conclusion that I don't think that there is really a very coherent worldview that is actually being pushed. I think there are a lot of different people within the administration's orbit, within the White House, who have all kinds of different worldviews, who are all trying to use their position in government to advance their particular priorities. But I think what that leads to is instead of having this kind of unified, coherent strategy, you end up just having a whole mess of things going on that sometimes step on each other's toes.
So one of the first issues that you tackle in your piece, and again, folks, great piece at Jacobin. Donald Trump is doubling down on all of Joe Biden's failures. You talk about the affordability crisis, and that Trump promised to end inflation and bring down prices, which I think a lot of people would tell you was somewhat laughable, because the president, in most instances, can't directly impact the economy, that there are so many moving parts on the economic side that the president can lay some foundations and can promote some policies and ideas, but as much as they love to take responsibility for the economy when it's doing well, and then they want to blame somebody else when it's not, the president really can't do as much as, I'll put it this way, can't do as much as people try to give them credit or blame for. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, yes, this is what we hear. I mean, it's a seesaw, because whenever it's a Democratic president in office, this gets rolled out. The idea that the presidency is weak. The president doesn't have that much power. Ultimately, if nothing really gets done, or if a whole host of promises are left on the side of the road at the end of the day, that's just the nature of the beast. The president just can't do everything by himself. And then when you have a right-wing president, when you have a Republican president in office, then it becomes the same exact people who made this excuse under a Democratic administration say, actually, my God, look how immensely powerful the presidency. Oh my God, he can do whatever he wants. This is a king. We can't believe what is going on. We need to do things to limit the power of the presidency, and so on and so forth. And then that's all forgotten again when a Democrat is reelected. So I would say, to give maybe a bit of a wishy-washy response to what you're saying, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think, look, Trump is constrained. He's pushing the limits of what he can do, obviously, but he has been rebuked by the courts in a number of situations. Immigration more than anything, but in other aspects too. And you can see what they're trying to do is they are working within the limits of the law. I mean, just absolutely skirting that boundary between breaking the law and going outside of what is legally allowed, and staying within it. But they ultimately, there are certain constraints. You might even think about the fact that, they just, in the small New York town the other day, they released this family that ICE had arrested because there were massive protests in that town. I think more than 1,000 people turned out in a town of 1,300 residents. So bottom line, I think the president is constrained. It is true that they do not have as much power.
I was speaking more just from the economy perspective.
Yeah.
Just from the economic perspective, that there are so many elements that impact the economy, that the president's impact on the economy is not nearly as dramatic as most people think it is. That's where I was going. That's the point.
Gotcha. Well, but even there, it's a tale of two cities, because on the one hand, yes, that's true. I mean, Trump should not be able to just unilaterally
tank the economy,
announce this tariff regime. That is not within the president's power to do. But because of
his party allowing him to do it.
Exactly, the abdication of congressional responsibility, which has been going on for decades. And this has been a huge problem in foreign policy more generally as well. And now it's kind of starting to creep into domestic policy too. But because of the abdication of responsibility from Congress, because of the fact that Trump is kind of using the court system, he does these things knowing that there's going to be a court challenge, but also knowing that these court challenges are going to take time to be resolved. And in the meantime, this stuff is in effect. It is causing chaos. I mean, even if these tariffs end up getting struck down in a legal challenge, let's say, the damage has been done because he has sent panic through the economy, and he's tanked the stock market. Now, that's a very bad thing. But then on the other hand, you think about, under the Biden administration, I'm constantly thinking about this. We were told that the Biden presidency was this radical experiment and kind of, taking us back to Franklin Roosevelt and the kind of New Deal wielding of government power to make life better and doing things, daring things that no other administration would have tried. And now when you look back and you compare this to what Trump is doing, that doesn't really hold water. I mean, Trump has done far more executive orders than Biden ever did. Trump is deliberately pushing the limits of what he can do and testing the kind of court oversight of the presidency, which Biden never dared to do, because Biden at heart was always an institutionalist who cared much more about preserving U.S. institutions than trying to do things for in the pursuit of a political goal. So now it's funny because while I do think that the presidency is constrained, I do think Trump is limited in what he can do economically. We're seeing that even a constrained president in the United States can have far-reaching impacts on economic life, for better and for worse. And it makes you think, why wasn't some of this tried in the opposite direction when you had total Democratic control of governance?
Well, and that's a great question. And a couple of things. One, we can go back to the Obama administration, and we can look at the hope and change and the si se puede, yes we can, what we were told through the Obama administration, and then look at how limited the so-called progressive agenda was there. And when he, in fact, had control of the House and the Senate for the first 2 years of his presidency, many would argue he didn't fight for anything. He didn't try. And people never really tried to force him to do anything. And so I think we can go, again, back to the Obama administration and just start the conversation there in a current context. And the other thing is, I think a lot of people fail to really appreciate that the tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch was written into the Constitution. There's supposed to be this tension. There's supposed to be this fight. That's why they have separation of powers and checks and balances. But when one entity abdicates its responsibility to the other entity and just rolls over and plays dead, some would say Obama abdicated his responsibility in the executive branch by not fighting more with Congress. And now we have Congress just rolling over to get their tummies scratched as Trump runs amok with the Constitution. That tension isn't there, hence our democracy is in jeopardy.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth remembering that in 2009, when you had this economic crisis, I mean, we don't know if we're quite in a recession yet at the moment, but back then we definitely were. The country definitely was, and Obama did not pursue cram down. Basically the allowing people to readjust their mortgages in the face of this crisis. And the reason why was not because he was blocked. That's the now the kind of story. Everything bad that happened or everything good that didn't happen under Obama, it was because he was blocked by Congress. No, that was a decision made by Obama's advisors because a pure ideology. They feared that doing this, even though it would have been a great help to a lot of families, it would have been a vital lifeline to people that were drowning in this foreclosure crisis. They felt that would be undermining the kind of sanctity of private contracts, and that it would lead to a kind of collapse of the economic order. And then now you think about the objections to that, which looks minor compared to some of the stuff Trump is doing now, and was doing in a economic situation that was very different from 2009. The economy Trump inherited from Biden was not one in crisis. It was deeply flawed and ailing, but it was not in the same kind of crisis that Obama inherited. And yet Trump has taken much more far-reaching measures with much less care about violating certain norms, I guess.
Your take now on these town halls, because as we know, that folks are increasingly becoming more upset. A lot of Republicans are flooding into their the offices and of their elected representatives, particularly on the congressional side. So much so that Mike Johnson has told his constituents, his conference, we don't the optics here are not in our favor. We don't want to stop having these town halls, and the Democrats seem to be trying to take advantage of this, but they're not offering anything. They're just going and saying, yeah, things are bad. Yeah, this guy sucks. Yeah, this guy is crazy. But I'm waiting for them to start saying, here's what we will do when you give us power.
Yeah, I mean, that is my question about all of this kind of, anti-Trump energy, or, resistance energy, which, I think obviously is important. It's important for the public, if they are unhappy with leadership, to push back and to make their voices heard. But the question is it going to result in anything beyond just kind of this, what we've already had for basically a decade, which is just a sort of single-minded obsession with an opposition to Trump, but nothing beyond it? Or is it actually going to result in some kind of positive vision for change that offers something beyond just restoring the pre-Trump normal, which, was not normal for a lot of people? It was a really a very bad situation for a lot of people, which is why Trump has been elected now twice. And so that's my big question, and I think this, I don't know what is going to happen, but this may be the value of having someone, on the left in Congress running for president, even if they don't end up winning, even if, obviously a run for presidency is not going to nearly fix every problem that is facing the country. What we saw in 2019, that period between 2017 and 2020, when you had an actual competitive race for the presidency, and you had a progressive challenger, a viable progressive challenger in the form of Bernie Sanders, it did actually shift the political terrain on the Democratic side. It forced these centrist, corporate-funded Democrats who, had no real interest in pursuing the things they were talking about necessarily, but they felt pressured to respond to the actual positive progressive vision that Sanders was putting forward. Where, if Sanders came out with a healthcare plan, they had to come up with a healthcare plan as well. They couldn't just sit idly by and criticize Trump and hope that was going to get them over. If Sanders put out, a plan for foreign policy, talked about ending the Yemen war, they had to also come up with something. And so my hope would be, in the same way that Sanders and AOC have been going around and kind of helping to rile people up and organize them and get them, getting on the ground and making their voices heard, that similarly that might, spur the creation of an actual positive vision for the next 4 years beyond just let's all go back to the way things were before Trump came along, which I think is not going to work and just going to keep us in this endless cycle.
But here's the problem that I see with Bernie Sanders 3.0. And that is he's become the sheepdog for the Democrats. He's become the bell cow. So he, in his first run, comes out with the ideas that you mentioned, and the Democrats sank him. He comes out in his second effort, speaking very populist, very good social democratic ideas. The Democrats sank him. And that's evidenced by the emails that were released. By the way, folks, no, the Russians did not hack into the DNC server. That's all garbage. But those emails did show us that Hillary Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz went after this guy. And folks need to remember, before they got to South Carolina, Bernie was winning. And they were telling us that we've got to shift to Joe Biden because Bernie can't win. But Bernie was winning. But anyway, so now we see Bernie out here again. And one of the things that I find incredibly telling is, other than AOC standing next to him on his anti-oligarchy tour, the party isn't behind him. He once again is out there, with the exception of AOC, as a lone soldier. Branko.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This is not, the party does not want any sort of movement that is led by either of these people to succeed, and nor do they want any of the people that would be interested in organizing around these candidates to succeed. But that is the value of something like that. I mean, the Sanders movement, even though it failed, unfortunately, it did. It mobilized, tens of thousands of Americans across the country, and ultimately, even though he was stopped, Sanders' ideas made it into the Biden platform, which for a year looked like it might actually pass. Unfortunately, Joe Biden left in the hands of Joe Biden. No, it did not.
But see, my point in bringing that up is, you're right. Some of Bernie's agenda, or some of Bernie's platform, did make it into the Biden administration, but then was not championed by Joe Biden and the Democrats. So now people sit back and they say, man, we've seen this movie before, which is one of the reasons why, when you look at the current data, the Democrats' polling data is some of the worst that they've seen in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The thing is that, the other movie is the one that happened in 2024, where there was no competitive primary. There was absolutely no challenge, no progressive challenge. And what you had was this lackluster campaign, first by Biden, then by Harris, that didn't really run on anything aside from anti-Trumpism, didn't promise that much to people. A few things here and there, the first home buyers grant and so on, but didn't deal with the fact that healthcare is more expensive than ever, that people are still going bankrupt even if they are insured, that basically if you're under 65, you are one job loss away from being potentially completely sick and destitute. Nothing was offered because there was no pressure from the left to do so. And what happened was we ended up with Trump. I don't think that's the main battle that's going to be going on, but I do think, if we're talking about the Democratic Party, I think there has to be some kind of progressive challenger. Otherwise, they're probably just going to be in a cycle of just doing this again and again, running on anti-Trumpism. And like you said, the Democratic brand right now is very weak. Just rerunning, we're Democrats and we won't be Trump. I don't know if that's actually going to end up beating the Republicans again. It's failed twice now.
The next area you get into is foreign policy, and I want to make just one more point to put a bow around what we were just talking about, and that is listening to Hakeem Jeffries after the election and even up till now. It seems as though the Democrats still have no idea of what target to even try to hit, other than Donald Trump is an idiot and this is evil and we all should know better. Hakeem Jeffries said about 2 weeks ago, when this whole discussion about the town halls came out, and Donald Trump said, all these protesters at the Republican town hall are paid by the Democrats. And then Mike Johnson came out and said, they're all paid protesters. And Hakeem Jeffries' response was, we don't have to pay them. The people are with us. And the question I was asking was, well, man, what people are with you? Because obviously you aren't looking at the polling data. You suck. And that's what the data is telling us. I want to say at the time, the Democrats' approval rating was about 27%. So they really either are just totally tone deaf, or they're just politically. You've got James Carville saying, well, first of all, you've got Nancy Pelosi saying, we don't have to do anything as Democrats. We can sit back and just let them implode. And James Carville is saying the same thing. That's a very long diatribe.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think this is a party and a group of people that live in denial. And they showed, I think, in the last election that they are more than willing to live in denial, even if it means that they lose. And they don't mind losing, despite everything that's happened over the last few months. They were very prepared to continue with a president who was obviously unfit for the job and that everyone could see was unfit. And just tank the election and regroup for 2028. So this is a party that is, I don't think there's much, there's a lot of thought going on there. I think the big question is that I think there is a real energy on the ground among ordinary people. I think these town halls are an example. I think the organizing by federal workers who have been fired or on the chopping block, I think that's another example. The labor organizing activity that's going on despite all the attacks on unions. I think there is think about these massive protests that just happened last week. So there is energy on the ground. And then the question is, how is it going to be channeled, or how is it going to actually make itself felt in the political space in the next few years?
And that's my point, because I'm not getting any sense from the Democrats as a party that they have offered anything to channel that. I'm glad you put it that way. They're not offering anything to channel it. They just seem to want to assume that disgruntled Republicans will become voting Democrats. Because when you listen to some of the commentary coming from these town halls, you hear a lot of Republicans saying, we didn't vote for this. This is not what we voted for, which I interpret as really meaning, oh, I voted for this, but you weren't supposed to do this to me. My daughter wasn't supposed to lose her job. My wife wasn't supposed to lose her job. I'm a veteran, and now I can't get my appointment with my psychologist at the Veterans Administration to deal with my PTSD. But I don't hear anything from the Democrats that will speak to those disgruntled Republicans and say, we are offering something better. Come and talk to me.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think, it is the job and the challenge for a movement to try and make, in a two-party system where you really just have two options, and there's only two games in town, you have to make the party respond to what you are demanding. And, we'll see. We'll see if that's possible. I mean, we're only a few months in. I will say what's interesting is you look at some of the numbers, not the approval numbers of the Democratic Party. It's obviously historically terrible when it comes to the general public. But what's also fascinating is that someone like Chuck Schumer, who all through the first Trump term actually really enjoyed really strong support, despite Schumer has long been a target of the left and he has been criticized constantly in progressive media. But nonetheless, he had very, very high approval ratings among Democratic voters. That is not the case now. Democratic voters hate their own party and their own leadership. And so what's interesting is that potentially opens the door, maybe creates a more conducive environment actually for what people were doing in 2018, but where the party was not really ripe for any kind of takeover. Because voters were actually pretty satisfied with the Democratic Party. It'll be interesting to see if something similar happens in the coming years, and if it's more successful. But that remains to be seen. We'll have to watch events as they unfold over the next few years.
You go on in your piece to talking about foreign policy. It's not just that all the wars that were going on under Biden, Ukraine, Yemen, and Gaza, are still going on under Trump. That last one, incidentally, Trump had first forced a ceasefire on before, in a Biden-like move. He capitulated to Israel. And then that will take me to Dr. Nick here says, in fairness, MAGA didn't vote for invading the Panama Canal and Greenland and Canada, in fairness. So looking at the war footing that we're continuously still in, and with Donald Trump seeming to follow Biden's play and still trying to start a conflict with China over Ukraine, and then to Dr. Nick, MAGA didn't vote for invading Panama, Greenland, and Canada. Branko.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dr. Nick. I think that one, if you pay attention to the campaign, the Trump campaign made a very deliberate choice to try and exploit basically anti-war feeling in the electorate and a lot of people's unhappiness with the Biden administration for embroiling the country in a number of different conflicts. And number two, I think it's important to note that yes, I think a lot of people did not vote for this, but there is a schism, and you might even say really a civil war, a quiet civil war going on within MAGA world, within Trump world, within his own administration about the direction of foreign policy. Trump obviously stacked his foreign policy team with a lot of hawks who you would not in any way describe as America first. And in fact, many people would and have described them as neoconservatives, people like Michael Waltz or Marco Rubio, for instance. But there's also been a few appointments, lower level appointments, but appointments nonetheless, that have drawn from a more kind of, the ungenerous description is isolationist. You might say more restraint-oriented, kind of America first, anti-war, foreign policy realist voices. And that's actually aroused a lot of controversy on the right because you have certain neoconservative outlets and groups that have targeted these figures in an attempt to either prevent them from being confirmed or appointed or kind of, potentially try and get them fired. And so we've seen this playing out here and there behind the scenes. I mean, as one example, Daniel Davis, a former fellow at Defense Priorities, he is a long-time Ukraine war skeptic on the right. He's a supporter of Trump's. I think he would have been a great foreign policy pick. He was appointed, and then basically his criticism of Israel, Jewish Insider, they made a big deal out of it. A lot of other right-wing outlets and voices picked it up, and he was dropped. And that was considered a major scalp for the kind of, pro-war, pro-Israel crowd. On the other hand, you had someone like Elbridge Colby, who was a hawk, but who is a more dovish voice in Ukraine. He was recently appointed. You've seen the furor over Michael Waltz and his signal controversy that revealed that he was in communication with Jeffrey Goldberg. I think that was an attempt for the restraint crowd to maybe try and claim a scalp of their own. So I think that's true. There is a kind of battle going on for what the actual future of foreign policy under the Trump administration is going to be.
You mentioned Rubio and Lil Marco, as we have all come to know and love him. What do you make of when you listen to Lil Marco? He is having to articulate positions and defend positions that a year ago he would have said were utterly insane. J.D. Vance once compared Donald Trump to Hitler, and now he's standing next to him as his vice president. Do you have any sense, and I'm not asking you to use your crystal ball, but you do know quite a bit and have written and researched quite a bit, how does this portend for their futures in politics?
I mean, I think that
Trump... Is that a valid question to ask?
Oh, completely. I mean, Trump dominates the Republican Party. No matter how unpopular he might get with the rest of the public, Republicans are fully behind Trump. People say cult of personality, whatever you want to say. The party is him, and so all of these guys, even if they are former rivals and critics of Trump, or if they just hold views that are nowhere near in keeping with what Trump says and what the people who voted for him believe in, they have to at least tie themselves to Trump and make themselves appear to be supportive of, nominally what his agenda is, as a way to secure their political future. So you see J.D. Vance. I mean, the meeting with Zelensky, I think, actually is an instructive example for both of those guys, Rubio and Vance. Because on the one hand, you had Vance. It was a 40-minute meeting. You had Vance mostly sitting there quietly, but he took the opportunity at one point to come in and really, perform the sort of America first, the par excellence figure, the guy who is going to be Trump's heir, not just in terms of standing up for the country and defending it against perceived disrespect from foreigners, but also in a sense of, look, I can be just as tough and belligerent as Trump is. And then meanwhile, you had Rubio kind of sitting there looking incredibly uncomfortable.
He looked like he needed to be sitting at the children's table at Thanksgiving. He was in the wrong room with the wrong people, wearing a suit too small, shoes too big, and had on a striped shirt with a plaid tie. He was totally in the wrong swimming pool.
No, for sure. I mean, Vance is someone who clearly is very comfortable taking on that sort of MAGA persona.
Bravado BS.
Yeah, and particularly on foreign policy. Vance obviously has been, not in Israel, because of course there's an exception for both parties when it comes to Israel. But on other elements of foreign policy, has been more kind of oriented towards the restraint side. Rubio has never been that way. And so Vance feels comfortable performing this character. I think Rubio does not, because he's not this guy. Rubio is a guy who wants to wage war in every single country. And I mean, I have to say, if you look at what is happening with the Trump administration so far, it is the Rubios of the White House that are winning out, because they, I think among other reasons, they outnumber the more kind of anti-war restraint Trump people.
You mentioned that Trump controls the Republican Party and that it is a cult. It is a party of personality, and you're absolutely right. Based upon what we're seeing so far, and how disgruntled so many of these Republicans are becoming, do you get a sense that there could be a shift back to normal? And I put normal in quotes. I'll say back to the Mitch McConnell elements of the party, or has that ship sailed?
I don't think there's a return back to that. Now, I think that ideologically the party has changed. I think that, and particularly because of the working class support that the party has drawn, which has been a huge hindrance to Democrats who I think for decades just believed that they could sit there and just have working class and poor people vote for them forever without really doing anything. That has been shown not to be the case. And so I think that the party has been changed. I think there's also been a lot of people who have shifted. I mean, there's people within the Trump administration right now, as we speak, people in some key positions who start out as Democrats, people who are more on the left-leaning side of the spectrum, who have shifted to kind of being more in the kind of MAGA side of things. So I think the party has shifted ideologically. Does that mean that the kind of leading lights of the party, the leadership and some of the major figures have changed? No. Clearly, the party is still led by people who are really not on board with a lot of this stuff. People like the Rubios of the world, people like Tom Cotton, someone who is a huge hawk, and I think is going to be positioning himself for a future presidential run. So that's the same with the Democrats as well. I think this has been true for many, many years. You look at polling among Democratic voters, they on the complete other side of the Democratic leadership and a whole host of things. I think
Well,
Israel Gaza has been probably the biggest example of that, but you could go through many other cases.
and that's the next part of my question is you talked about the Republicans generating working class support, and for the last 50 years that has not been their base. That has been the Democrats' base. Are we now seeing a shift in the dynamic, and especially because, I say this again, the Democrats aren't offering anything, so the Republicans kind of see these folks as low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So so are the Democrats in the process of conceding a great bit of their what for the last 50, 60 years has been a part of their base?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been happening for decades, and we've seen it slowly happening much more dramatically over the last few election cycles. And I mean, in this most recent one, Trump won. Majority of people earning between 50K and 100K and 50K and under, and it was Harris who won the people who made over $100,000. That's a huge shift. So, I think none of this stuff is inevitable. None of this stuff is permanent. I mean, as this shift itself shows, things can change very quickly. But the question is, I mean, for the Democrats, I think the question is, are they actually going to do anything to try and stop this from happening? Their theory for a long time has been, I think it's been a disastrous theory, but their theory is, well, we can just lose working class voters, and as long as we win people in the suburbs, we win highly educated people, former Republicans, that'll make up for it. This has been shown repeatedly to not be true. But again, we have a party that has created a bubble of denial for itself to live in. So are they going to realize this? I don't know. I think they have to be forced into realizing it, and that's going to be the big one of the big tests of this bubbling grassroots movement that's coming up right now.
That mindset I would attribute to Bill Clinton, and as he and Al Gore and some of the others created the Democratic Legislative Council, trying to shift, and successfully shifting the Democratic Party more to the right. I remember Hillary in her first campaign believing that in some of the policies that she was articulating, she would alienate some of her base. And the response was that we'll offset the Democrats we lose with the Republicans that we pick up.
Right.
And she did that in her second campaign. And I think that brilliance was attributable to her husband, and it proved to be an incredibly bad idea. And the other element to this, I'll add, is the Democrats over the last 30 years or so for longer than that, they've never wanted to be considered the party of race. They've never wanted to be, they always want to come to the Black community and beg us for our votes. But in terms of the policy that they articulate, they've never wanted to be considered the party of Black people, because they've always been trying to attract the middle-class white male.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very strange series of shifts, and that has not been good for the party. I will say to look at the other side of the ledger for a moment. I think there's also a reason to caution for caution among Republicans too. I mean, one big question is, does working class support for the GOP survive beyond Trump? In other words, if Trump is no longer on the ballot, our voters still going to be going for the GOP. We've seen that a lot of the votes that they've won have been tied to how people view Trump as someone who is a fighter against the establishment, someone who fights against some of these systems that people feel like are constraining them, or and he's also someone who has a lot of credibility on trade. And so, are people going to continue to vote Republican once Trump is out of the picture? Are they going to vote for J.D. Vance in the same way? Are they going to find him as appealing, as much of a fighter as they did Trump? The other big question is, the GOP at the moment is in the process of not just, union busting, doing hundreds of thousands of layoffs of federal workers, dismantling government programs. But its big centerpiece of its agenda that they want to pass under the Trump administration is a budget that will decimate Medicaid, that will make cuts to food stamps, that will make cuts to all kinds of programs so that you can pay for a massive tax cut for the rich. Maybe the bet is that they can do that and people will just not notice, and that they'll, continue to have this working class support. But it's also possible that if they manage to do this, that they engender a lot of resentment among working class voters who end up abandoning the party. So, I think, like I said, nothing is really set in stone. None of this stuff is necessarily permanent. And that's probably an important thing for both of these parties to, keep in mind.
Final thing I wanted you to speak to, and to me, this is huge. I'll use my improper grammar to say one of the more hugest is censorship, and we saw this under the Biden administration in the closing days when they were attacking students at Columbia University who were protesting genocide in Gaza. Imagine people that are having a problem with genocide. Who would think that people could be so crazy and insensitive? But you had Mike Johnson and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the same side of this issue, and so you had Joe Biden trying to create his I can't remember the name of it, the Democrat, not the committee that he tried to create.
The misinformation,
disinformation. That's it. But they also took it beyond the internet to attacking academia, and we know, of course, that this also, we can attribute some of this to Dick Cheney and his wife, Lynn Cheney. She was trying to attack academia at the same time, but this now seems to be full blast attack, and I'm sensitive to this as a college professor. But the censorship elements of this, both sides are equally complicit.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I would say it's probably an understatement, because what we've seen in the last few months it goes beyond equal. I mean, this is such a ramping up of direct state suppression of speech and protest that there's few precedents in American history for what we're seeing right now. And it goes well, the Biden administration, what people accused it of was it was involved in pressuring tech companies to censor opinions that it didn't like, which I disagree with, and I wrote about quite a bit. I thought that was pretty outrageous. And there was also some of its counterterrorism stuff that it was doing. It was starting to cross the line into kind of over prosecuting protest and classifying it as terrorism as a way to kind of chill speech. Both of those things have massively expanded under Trump. I mean, I mentioned some of the examples in the piece. Obviously, what's happening on Palestine. People having their visas revoked or not being allowed to come to the country, even having their permanent residency revoked now if you have the wrong opinion, apparently. But beyond that, it goes well beyond Palestine. You have suppression. You have the FBI keeping tabs on people who say things that are hostile to CEOs because they're worried that it'll be another Luigi Mangione that comes along. Tech censorship has not gotten any better. Trump said, the tech censorship is over, free speech is back. It's not true. People are still being censored. Maybe it's not conservatives who are being censored, but you have abortion pill providers having their posts being taken down and their accounts being locked out. You have pro-LGBTQ posts that were put down. You have, again, stuff that is perceived as anti-CEO also being barred from certain tech platforms. I've spoken to a number of people who work in the space who said that nothing has really changed when it comes to censorship of social media. And then this happened after I wrote the piece, but recently you not only had the Trump administration seemingly targeting political opponents, people who had spoken out against Trump and ordering investigations into them. But the number of anti-protest laws, hundreds of these get introduced all across the country every single year. The amount that has been introduced just in the last few months exceeds almost every other year. So free speech is not back. There is a profound assault on the most basic right that this country was founded on, the right to speak freely and criticize your government, and it's happening across partisan lines and everywhere you go.
Can you give me just a couple more minutes to answer this last question?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. The deportation issue and sending these Venezuelans to El Salvador, and now we know that there's the case of the legal resident from Maryland who got caught up in all of this. And now the Supreme Court has said, they didn't say bring him back by Monday. They've said, well, you got to facilitate the manner in which this man is to return. I have been saying since this whole thing started that this is not so much a matter of immigration / deportation as it is the Trump administration using this, challenging the due process clause.
Yeah.
And that for those that want to dismiss this as, oh, whatever you do to illegal immigrants is whatever you do. No, folks, the real motive here is us. That if he is able to push the envelope on due process, then that means he can turn his ire towards the very political enemies that he perceives or other enemies and send them away. And then what do we have 2 days ago? White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed Trump's quip about wanting to, quote unquote, deport incarcerated U.S. citizens to El Salvador, and that the White House has actually been discussing such policy. Your thoughts, Branko?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. This is an immensely dangerous road to go down, and it's not limited to immigrants, nor is it limited to undocumented immigrants only. It is everyone. Everyone is at threat, because basically what Justice Sotomayor wrote this in recent dissent on the Supreme Court decision around this, and she's completely right. This is basically creating the legal groundwork to be able to basically snatch up anyone, even a U.S. citizen, accuse them of a crime, throw them into a detention cell, and as long as you get them out of that detention cell and onto a plane and have that plane take off and be in the air quick enough that the courts cannot intervene and rule on it, they say, oh, well, sorry, well, the plane has left the border, so therefore you don't have jurisdiction. They're off to a prison in Syria. I mean, it's essentially legalizing the rendition,
special renditions.
Of George W. Bush, but now it can be applied to even U.S. citizens, and all they have to do, all it has to happen is that there has to be an accusation by someone. Doesn't have to be proven, doesn't have to be substantiated, could be completely wrong, doesn't matter. Even if they make a mistake, they just apparently can say, oh, whoops, well, too bad. That person's now being tortured in a dungeon somewhere in the Middle East. It's completely outrageous. And by the way, I mean, anyone on the right who is supporting this, I mean, Republicans are not going to control the government forever. So, are you comfortable with a Democratic president one day having this exact same power to single someone out and say, hey, you know what, we're going to just accuse them of a crime and send them to some torture dungeon in Central America? I don't think so. This is just a across the board, whatever party you are supporting, whatever your political beliefs, this should be an absolute no-go for you.
And another example of that is what he's now doing to a lot of these Venezuelans who were in America, voted for Donald Trump, and now their immigration status is being challenged and questioned by the administration, and many of them are now on their way back to Venezuela. So this is a no-win game for everybody. Branko Marcetic, thank you, man, so much for your time. Again, folks, it's a great piece that you can find at Jacobin. And the piece is entitled, well, again, Branko wrote the book, Yesterday's Man. And the piece that he wrote is Donald Trump is doubling down on all of Joe Biden's failures. Branko Marcetic, thank you again so much for your time. Have a wonderful weekend and look forward to having you back.
Cheers. Appreciate it, Willem.
All right. Hey, folks. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. And again, let me remind you that we are still pushing incredibly hard to get to 10,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. And to those of you that are viewing and listening and have yet to subscribe on YouTube, we greatly would appreciate it if you do. We're almost at 7,000 subscribers. And we cannot do this without you. I say all the time that we are here doing this for you, but we can't do this without you. And, you know, there were a couple of y'all early on in this conversation that took issue with my having Branko on and the fact that he writes for Jacobin. Well, I'm not looking. This is as I say on my XM show. This is rhetoric-free radio. I'm not here pushing an agenda. I'm not here pushing an ideology. I have found Branko Marcetic his analysis to be solid. Do I agree with everything that he says? No. Do I agree with everything I say? No. But I find him to be a phenomenal writer, a very clear writer. And I thought that was a fairly sound and solid conversation. So, you know, the fact that he writes for Jacobin, well, okay, fine. But what was the content of the conversation? That would be my question to y'all. So anyway, we're trying to get to 7. We're almost at 7,000. We're trying to get to 10. We can't do this without you. So please hit the subscribe button, follow us on Facebook. And this is one way of many that you will be able to stay connected, stay informed, and stay on top of a lot of the analysis, because as you can tell, we bring you stuff, we bring you the minds, we bring you the thinkers that you're not going to hear through the mainstream. And final point, as I look to tell you all to have a wonderful weekend, you can go back and you can listen to the previous shows. You can binge watch this. In fact, here's something you all might want to try to do this weekend. Have a cookout. Have a cookout, and binge watching Connecting the Dots can be one of the attractions for the cookout. How about that? Go to Big Mama house, bring all the family over to the backyard, and we're going to binge watch Connecting the Dots. How about that? And final point, to those of you that are contributing through Patreon, please do. And there are no tariffs when you do. I'm not assigning tariffs to any of the contributions. This is a tariff-free zone. So, with all of that having been said, I want to thank you all so much. Follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. We don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. Monday, Mark Shloboda. We're going to get some really great insight into what's going on in Ukraine, because that, for some, as Gladys Knight and the Pips would say, for some ungodly reason, that now seems to have dropped off the radar. So we're going to find out what's happening in Ukraine, as well as some of the other areas in the world. Mark Shloboda will join us on Monday. With that, folks, see y'all next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful week and enjoy the remainder of your day. I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.